let's say there are people who are feeling these fears and they are feeling these negative emotions every night and they're overthinking, and that is not helping them in their lives. How do they stop it?
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why we teach people that the reason that we use meditation is not to heal or to create success or whatever, or abundance, or to have a mystical experience, but we use meditation as a way to change, right? And so to become conscious of those unconscious thoughts that you think when you're feeling fear, it's so important to become so conscious that you don't go unconscious to those thoughts again. In other words, just because you have a thought doesn't necessarily mean it's true, right? And if the anxiety and the worry and the fear is something that you experience on a daily basis, then in meditation, you have to become so conscious that you don't go unconscious and let that fear run you. And then how do you behave? Do you stay up and ruminate over those what if scenarios in your life? You have to become so conscious that you don't go unconscious and fall back into that habit again. And so the act of remembering and not forgetting in your meditation is exactly how you change, right? So then that unlearning process, there's only part of it. Then there's a relearning process. Like you have to break the habit of the old self, but then you have to reinvent the new self. So in your meditation, to become familiar with the way you think, to become familiar with the way you act, to become familiar with the way you feel. The word meditation means to become familiar with, to know thyself. And then in the reinvention process, what do I want to think? Let me remember how I do want to think in that situation and change in that moment and think different thoughts. And the only way I'm going to be able to think those different thoughts is not when I'm struggling in those emotional states. I have to program my brain in my meditation to begin to think in a different way. What do I want to believe? And a belief is just a thought you keep thinking over and over again. So with intention and with your attention, let me remember what I do want to believe. And if you keep thinking that thought over and over again, nerve cells that fire together wire together. You begin to install the hardware in your brain. But that's not enough. You have to do it enough times that those circuits begin to fire more automatically. They begin to hardwire. And now that becomes the new voice in your head. How do I want to behave? Or how do I want to act when I'm feeling fear? What is an alternative? What does greatness look like? What would be loving to myself? Let me sit up in that state when I'm feeling that fear, and let me go into it and let me change it, right? So let me rehearse in my mind. Let me review how I'm going to behave. Mental rehearsal, the act of closing your eyes and choosing a different behavior. The research shows if you're truly present, the brain does not know the difference between the real life experience and what you're imagining. So the brain begins to fire and wire new circuits to look like you already did the act, right? Keep doing it and it becomes a software program, and it's more easy for you to behave that way because you've primed the brain. In other words, if you don't prime the brain and you're struggling, you have no circuitry to use, right? Yeah. And then you have to say, okay, let me practice feeling a different emotion. Instead of fear, let me practice feeling gratitude. Let me see how many times I could bring up the feeling of gratitude. And if you, in your meditation, could bring it up over and over again, and remember to feel this way, and you keep doing it over and over again, you're making chemicals, right? And if you keep doing it, you can condition your body to feel that feeling more automatically. And you can begin to become familiar with a new way of thinking. You can become familiar with a new way of acting, and you become familiar with a new way of feeling. And I think a lot of people just think that they have to stay stuck in there, and they try to think positively when they're feeling really negatively, right? And that's not the solution. The work is, okay, now that I'm realizing that I'm struggling in the evenings, I got to do the inner work, not when I'm struggling, but when I start my day or before I go to sleep at night. Let me remind myself where I'm not going to go, right? Let me remind myself what thoughts that I'm not going to entertain. Let me remind myself when I feel that fear that I could settle that emotion down And when I start ruminating and I start acting this way, I got to remember that that's how I used to behave. I'm going to begin to change when I begin to think differently, when I begin to act differently, and I begin to feel differently. Now, theoretically, it sounds easy, but there's no other alternative unless you rely on something outside of you to change your internal state. So the act of changing from one state of mind and body to another state of mind and body, and priming your brain and body to have the biology, the circuitry, the chemistry in place. If you keep doing it, you'll begin to choose to think that way more often, choose to act that way more often, choose to feel that way more often. And I think that process is, it takes a little bit of time. But if you keep doing it, people change all the time.